Today, I've got my first guest on this new project that we're doing to get experts from all over the world to give us their view on banks, fiat currencies, gold, and anything that they want to impart in brief to anybody who's interested, so that we can try and give my followers, our mutual followers, information which isn't mainstream media. That we're getting no help from mainstream media. We're not getting the truth. We're just getting, as always, lies from bankers and politicians. So what we're trying to do here is to make your life a little bit easier, and so you can find out what we think is going on, and we might make it interactive at some stage so that we can answer your questions, and we might have a session on that maybe next month, but we'll see how we go. Today, my first guest is Claudio, who is a fellow member of the Mises Institute, as I am. He's a libertarian, as I am, and he is an expert on gold, currencies, and banks. And of course, he is based in Switzerland, which one might argue is the heart of the place to be when it comes to observing global shenanigans that we're seeing at the moment. But perhaps, Claudia, you'd like to start off. We are used to, if we're building a portfolio, and I was investment management in the city, if I was building a portfolio of investments, one would expect the traditional way of having stocks and bonds and equities and real estate, a diversified portfolio, and that would be the traditional way of doing things. But times seem to have changed now, and a traditional portfolio is actually now high risk, and so we're looking at international portfolios with very actually small amounts of gold in them. One would imagine they would have much bigger holdings in gold, given the perilous situation we are in. When I was a young man in the city, one might have thought that a portfolio which contained Swiss banks and German banks would be really rock solid and low risk. And that's really been turned around on its head. So perhaps you'd like to give us the benefit of your experience and your views, and we can see where we should be going.
Okay. Well, I think, a portfolio, of course, always has to reflect what's going on in the world today. And it should also reflect what happened in the past. And so when I look at monetary policy, government intervention, how much credit they fueled into the system, basically since the middle of the 90s, I think that has been really a huge credit expansion. I mean, we created trillions of additional credit. I think today we are standing at roughly 310 trillion. I always say 1 trillion seconds represent 31,709 years. So it's just a huge figure. People lost the measure. We are just, talking about figures, trillions, quadrillions, and so on. So it's completely absurd. It's completely insane. It's a figure which is also, there is no comparison in history. And of course, guys who understand inflation and where inflation comes from, that it's basically the expansion of credit. They also understand that that credit had to go somewhere. And of course, it went into the traditional asset classes such as stocks, bonds, real estate. But when you look at the total universe, the financial universe these days, we have, out of 100%, we have 2.5% in commodities. And the rest is basically equity and bonds. So it just shows, commodities, hard assets, real assets, they're heavily undervalued. You can compare it also a little bit like, when you look at the Las Vegas circus in the financial universe and you compare it with the economy or the real economy growth, I mean, it's about the same gap, I would say, in comparison. So therefore, I think these days you have stuff which is highly expensive. You have stuff which is completely overvalued. You have stuff which has been fueled by inflationary bubbles. And so what we can say, from my opinion, is that, of course, precious metals, hard assets in general, are completely undervalued. And it makes sense to own them because, they cannot be inflated by central banks. They cannot be confiscated because they are somehow within the banking system. I think, hard assets makes absolutely sense to protect yourself against inflation and to own hard stuff, because at the end of the day, it's never about the scarcity of money. It's always about the scarcity of goods and services. Money is just a means to an end to buy goods and services. We haven't been productive over the last 2.5, 3 years. We basically destroyed the global supply chain. We basically destroyed the small and mid-sized companies. And so, we already, as a society, decreased our living standards because we did not produce as much as possible. And now, by taking away the energy as a political decision by our own leaders in the Western world, now they also even take away energy to produce goods and services. So I think it's, we are in a self-fulfilling prophecy, which basically will lead to the bust of the current system.
It's interesting, I think, that another asset class, and talking about hard assets, one historically would have looked at agricultural land, of which there's another finite supply, which gives a protection, if you will, against inflation. But we're now seeing compulsory purchase of agricultural land, and it doesn't seem any longer to be the kind of Rock of Gibraltar, as it were, that we were used to. If it can be confiscated so easily, Holland is a classic example of that. And of course, with Bill Gates being the biggest property owner in North America, we know that some bad guys are buying agricultural land. So one wonders, when we live in a global kleptocracy, as it were, and with the World Economic Forum and the IMF, it's interesting that assets that we might have to protect our families, like silver or gold or inherited or stewardship of agricultural land, perhaps isn't as safe as we thought it was. And I'd just like to pick up on a point you made, if you'd like to explain it, that obviously central banks are holding a lot of gold, and they're increasing gold all the time. I'm not sure how that protects confiscation of gold from individual citizens, as happened in the 1930s in America, and of course in the late 1700s in France. The confiscation, if you like, the medieval style of monarchy, confiscating people's private wealth. Would you like to just give a view on that? I know a Swiss would probably have a different view, perhaps, to elsewhere. But how's your view on that protection against the state actually stealing your wealth?
Yeah, I think we have basically what we can see is two trends. On the one hand side, we can go centralized. We are living in a centralized system already, and we can even centralize further, or we basically go decentralized. And when I look at Switzerland, of course, it's basically because when everything started back in 2020, I also had to ask myself, where do I want to live in the future? Am I at the right spot? Because the main question to me has always been, how are the people going to handle the outcome of all these Corona forced laws on us, the destruction of our culture, the destruction of supply chains, the destruction of a free society, the attack on an enlightened society, which is based on, I own my own body and mind, I'm not a means to an end. Free speech is important. You always have a choice. Private property needs to be respected. I think those kind of values are best protected in a very decentralized culture. And so when I look at the cultural all over the world, I truly believe that Switzerland still is the best jurisdiction you can find, because our history is based on these principles of subsidiarity. It's based on the principles of decentralization. The municipality is the most important community, and then on the next level there is a state, and then on the next level there you have the federal government. But so it was always a bottom-up approach. That's how the Swiss history developed, and also that has led to the enormous prosperity of Switzerland as a nation, because it was never top down, and this freedom and liberty in combination with hardship in the past always led that the Swiss had to reinvent their own economic history, And so it's still basically, for me, Switzerland is the antidote to the current system. Because to me, I see decentralization, subsidiarity, that must be the direction to go ahead. And I want to be surrounded with people who understand those kind of principles. And therefore, I truly believe Switzerland is still the best cultural area to be with.
I think most people would probably agree with you. I certainly agree with you. Bottom up is better. And of course, that comes with the principles of law, even in England, the Anglo-Saxon principles of law, much older than Magna Carta, so it was a very much more bottom up. I know it was medieval monarchies and this kind of thing, but it was very much more localized government and localized legal procedures that actually set, in fact, so good was it that the Normans, when they came in 1066, adopted most of that. They could see that it was a better system. But of course, we have walked away from our 1688 Bill of Rights and our Toleration Acts. Gradually, we've moved away, as the Americans have moved away from their constitution, which I always think was a very good document, which has been almost now completely abandoned. And you might argue it was abandoned in 1861, when people couldn't actually leave the Union and they were forced into the Union.
Absolutely.
At failure point. And that's another sort of argument that we libertarians would talk about. There's also another problem, of course. I think you and I would probably agree that we're looking for a breakdown in the banking system and the fiat currency system, because it can't go on like it is. It simply can't. It's broken already. It's just on a life support machine. But one of the problems that we have historically, if we look at historically, when a society breaks down in that way, whether it was 1920s Germany, the Weimar Republic, or the revolution in Russia, and so on and so forth, we always seem to end up getting a totalitarian regime, not a libertarian regime, because people seem to think you get a period of chaos and people think forget that it was the government that caused the problem to stop it. All our problems today in the world, in the Western world, are created by politicians. That everything, doesn't matter what you think about, a politician is at the end of it, whether it's mass immigration, high taxation, failing health systems. Politicians are always at the base of it. So if you have this bottom up, which I agree, this idea that you have in Switzerland, but to play devil's advocate for a moment, Claudio, am I wrong in thinking that it's not as strong as it was, that the Swiss are giving ground here and there? And I worry that Switzerland, which is the banner, the flag, as it were, of that kind of people power, if you will, for want of a better expression, there are things happening that I spot that I don't think the Swiss would have done 20 years ago. Am I wrong?
No, I fully agree. I fully agree. I think, especially, I mean, to me, I mean, a lot of things changed middle of the 90s. And I mean, really everywhere, you know, where we have seen, you know, this American bullshit culture coming over. You need an executive MBA to compete on a global scale, you know, globalization, think global, act local. And then, you know, the huge credit expansion, I mean, during the 90s. So since then, I mean, also, you know, Switzerland joined the United Nations. We joined the International Monetary Fund. We started to sell our gold reserves. That was all around 2000, the year 2000 overall. So we were facing a huge changes. And the trend, of course, has also been, you know, taking away responsibility from the municipalities and the states and concentrate it in the hand of the federal government, you know. So basically a redistribution of power, but also redistribution of wealth, because everything sounded nice. I mean, you know, the Swiss also, you know, the whole mass media propaganda campaign, I mean, in the Western world, I mean, also the Swiss have been influenced by it. And so I think the last 20 years that really made a huge change. At the same time, I always have to, you know, the Swiss are a bit naive when it comes to the government. Because imagine, you know, we survived. I mean, as a Swiss citizen, today we are still, you know, the most prosperous, the most happiest people on the planet at the end of the day, with the highest living qualities. I mean, we are really top of the top. And so the Swiss, you know, somehow we survived 2 world wars. And at the same time, we always had 7 presidents, you know, not only one. So we always had this division of power. We had a weak government. We had a lot of liberty. You know, a lot of people from abroad also came to Switzerland because they came because of more liberty, less government, less taxation, you know, more income. So I mean, that was all for the right reason. And so the Swiss are not used to even think about that a government can be as evil as they have become, obviously, you know, at least for those people who still can think for themselves independently of another person's guidance, you know, and realize that all this mass media destruction, propaganda, Muppet show is really, you know, is really nonsense. And so I think the Swiss, it takes a bit more time. You know, they trust a little bit more the government because it used to be very weak in the past. It was never oppressive. We're not used that the police is coming after us. Like we have seen pictures during Corona, you know, from the Netherlands, from Germany, from France, from Britain. I mean, you don't see these kind of pictures in Switzerland. You know, our authorities, they cannot deal the same way as the French government was able to deal, you know, and treat their own people. So there is still a bigger distance. I think that also, that is part of that quality, you know, that makes Switzerland a kind, still a bastion of liberty, of individual liberty.
And you think that's fundamentally still relatively sound? I know it's sound by the rest of the world standards, but that's a very low bar, isn't it? That's a very low bar. The
Absolutely.
rest of, I mean, constitutionally, everything that happened in England, the lockdown and all that kind of thing, was completely against our own constitution. People think we don't have a constitution because it's not written like the American constitution, but we do. And we suspended Parliament, basically, and everything was done by emergency decree. And we didn't hear the sort of people, this always amazes, and we've discussed this before, we have a constitutional monarchy, and it isn't, as people think, it isn't a cardboard cutout kind of constitutional monarchy. There are things that the monarch cannot sign off because it's against our constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Toleration Act, the Coronation Oath, but it's gone through on the nod, and Her Majesty before just nodded things through that Queen Victoria would never, ever have agreed to, and it would never have been given the royal assent. And it seems to me that, and I'm always surprised at the British people putting up with it. We put up with it. And of course, there are big demonstrations. There were demonstrations in England as well. There were demonstrations in France, big long-term demonstrations, which didn't make the mainstream media, but it didn't mean to say that it didn't happen. So there is this worry that it's a very compliant population. Of course, you talk about Switzerland history, Britain's the same. We haven't been invaded by anybody since 1066. So we're sort of tend to be asleep. Oh, we're British, nothing can happen to us, because we all know that God's an Englishman, Claudio, don't we? We know that to be true.
Yeah.
So well, consequently.
I mean, maybe I would dispute that you haven't been invaded over the past. You know, I think this cultural Marxism, this mass refugee political agenda, you know, to destroy all the cultures. I mean, that's so to me, I mean, this Corona bullshit for me was always a kind of cultural revolution. And you can compare it with Mao's China, you know, or the Bolsheviks in Russia, or even the Nazis in Germany. It's exactly the same. You know, what they're trying, those World Economic Forum anointed idiots, the intellectual yet idiots, you know, that's what Nassim Taleb said. So I think, you know, that's where we are. I'm positively astonished to see, especially also here in Switzerland, how many people just came to the conclusion that, you know, the current system is not an option for them any longer. You know, what they are saying is, you know, okay, we got it. You know, they will lock us out anyway. There is a world economic crisis coming. So why should we wait and, you know, trust on these politicians who are basically responsible for the whole chaos? So it rather makes more sense to take ourselves out of the system, take a step back. We leave the big cities, we leave the densely populated areas, and we try to find like-minded individuals in municipalities over here in Switzerland, a bit in the countryside, and we prepare for what is coming. You know, and I think that's what the Swiss are doing. They're buying a lot of physical gold and silver, for example, because at the end of the day, where did I stop?
Yes, you were taking steps to move out of the conurbations as far as it goes and find your own space.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I mean, also, people are buying physical precious metals because they understand that it's cash, it's money, it's nothing else. Gold is money, everything else is credit. That's already what JP Morgan said. So you own it, you're not invested in it, you become an owner. And I think the more gold in particular jurisdictions, the better the people will be off. And so overall, I see the trend here in Switzerland. I'm extremely positive. People are waking up. They understand that the government were lying to them. And I mean, I can see the same also all over the world. I mean, Switzerland is not the only cultural area where there are still some reasonable people around.
One final question, just a
Yeah.
final question, but and we'll meet again on this in a month or two and reassess, I hope. Well, there's one thing is that when the system breaks down, the fiat currency system breaks down, the banking, gold will then be a very expensive commodity per se. So, for example, a gold Britannia in England, it's already worth £1,500, and it's going to go to a lot. But a sovereign is worth about £360 or £70. So now here's the problem, and sometimes people ask me this: how am I going to pay when it all breaks down? How am I going to pay the milkman and the window cleaner when I've got he only wants the equivalent today of £25 or £30, and I don't have anything which is worth less than £400. Which brings me to the next question: is there a role for silver for a common currency on a day-to-day basis for settling your small domestic bills?
Absolutely. I mean, gold is the money of the kings. Silver is the money of the bourgeoisie. Barter trade is the money of the farmers. And paper or debt is the money of the slaves. And so, of course, there is a role for silver. I mean, I always urge people to buy, some silver coins, because the silver coins, you can use them in a direct barter with the butcher or the farmer or whatever. You can negotiate. One silver coin pays me a chicken per week for the next so weeks. And of course, gold has a huge purchasing power in those transition periods. 100 years ago, during the Weimar Republic, an ounce of gold or two purchased a house in Berlin, for example. So when it comes to gold, what I recommend to my customers is always, you need to have a highly liquid stock. You want to be liquid. You want to own a stock that you can use for barter in a crisis scenario. And so, for example, when it comes to gold, we have a format here made in Switzerland, which is a 50-gram bar, but you can break the 50 grams into 1 gram of gold. So it's highly liquid. You don't pay VAT. A 1 gram of gold at the moment is roughly $60. So, it's a format that gives you extreme liquidity. And then, of course, try to add more 1 ounce bars, but I would not go higher than 1 ounces for a normal, for a highly liquid stock, which the person always should consider as his insurance. It's his pension fund. That's how you have to look at it. You don't invest in gold to speculate. You basically buy gold and silver to put it on the side and to gain purchasing power, to increase your wealth, because that's what gold and silver has shown, especially, let's say, over the last 20 years. I mean, in dollar terms, gold appreciated on average per year 9.6% in dollar, and silver roughly, I think, 6.8%. So gold and silver did what they had to do, even during a manipulated system. It protected against inflation, and so it helps to build up wealth. And in a harsh crisis scenario, of course, it's your insurance which is going to help you to restart a new life.
Just winding up then, summarizing, and certainly for my followers, and I expect your followers to re-emphasize that gold isn't an investment. Gold is money. Gold is a preservation of wealth and spending power. And so when you hold it, it will buy you today. So if you, it will buy you in 100 years' time what it will buy you today, because it's a store of wealth and it's real money, and it has been so for 5,000 years. So anybody watching this who says perhaps, oh well, I bought a house in London, 10 years ago, and it's quadrupled in value. That isn't the point that we're making. That isn't the point that we're making. The point that only gold is money, and gold keeps its price, it keeps its value. It's paper money that degrades against it. So anybody who's thinking about that, think about your time procedure. You need to think how long. Don't trade it. Trading's for monks. Don't trade gold, it's for monks. You need to say that is a strategic holding for me and my family, and hang on to it, and put up with a little bit of adjustments in the price of it, and you'll do quite well. And I've been accumulating gold from an equity portfolio for the last 25 years. I got out of equities, made my money as a young man in equities, such as it is. And then I transferred to gold, and my wife and I are quite happy, not wealthy, but we're okay, So just if you're listening into Claudio and me on my side of the continent, just bear that in mind. Well, thank you, Claudio, for joining me. It's been really kind. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and get your perspective on things. I'd like to talk to you again in a month or two, and we'll just see how things are panning out, because I've got a feeling things are going to be moving very, very quickly.
Godfrey, always a pleasure talking to you. And yeah, I'm with you. I also believe there is a lot of stuff coming over the coming months. And maybe next year will be harsher. The winter next year will be harsher than this year, but it's enough to kill the industry and to further decentralize the European states.
Thank you. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So surprise won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.